Awesome. All right. So we're actually picking up at like a really exciting part of the book and a really exciting part of the steps. So what we're getting into is the prayer and the fourth column of resentments. And that's really my hope, is that we'll wrap up resentments in a nice little bow today. And I just welcome. And I just love this part of the program. Because I know for me, when I'm sitting and I'm working with the newcomer, this is when I see the light come on in their eyes. This is when I see that change really start to happen. And it's a beautiful, incredible, wonderful thing. And so where we'll pick up the reading will be at the bottom of page 65. But I thought it might be helpful for those who are just joining us today to do review. And I will do my best to do it as quickly, but also thoroughly as possible. So to get into our fourth step, the first thing that we're going to need is a notebook. And it's a little page sort of tip and trick. I mean, you'll need a pen regardless, but my little page suggestion is get a pen that you like writing with. It doesn't have to be a crazy expensive one, but just, if stationery nerds know what I'm talking about. Like, get a pen that you like. Don't get one that you got to scribble and get the ink going. Get a good pen. And the very first thing we're going to do before we do any and all writing on our fourth step is we're always going to start with a prayer. And you can use whatever words that you want to use, but something that just invites the God of your understanding into this process. God, I pray that you would be with me. Guide my mind, guide my heart, guide my pen as I go through this work. Something like that. And then whenever we are done writing on our fourth step inventory, it's always good to end with a prayer. God, and again, it can be whatever prayer works for you, whatever prayer that you like, but something like to the effect of, God, help me to leave the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions of this fourth step contained in this notebook. Help me to go out and be of love and service in your world. Something like that. You can use your own words. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw lines on the page. And I always make the joke, we weren't afraid of lines before. It's a great place to start, right? And we're going to do then there are a number of ways of formatting the fourth step and a number of ways they have printouts and worksheets. And I'm just showing you a way that I've found to be really practical and just a really good way to work. And so what we're going to do, one line across the page horizontally and 2 lines up. So one across the page, 2 lines up. And we create 3 columns on top, 1 on the bottom. And then what we do is we flip the page, 1 line across, 2 lines up. Flip the page, 1 line across, 2 lines up. And we're going to want to do that on like 50 pages. We're going to use the same page format throughout our resentments, throughout our fears, and throughout our sex or relationship contact. So just like before, can't do too many lines. So that's what we're going to do. And then what we're going to do, I'm just going to share what we did and what we spoke about last week was the first 3 columns. And one of the biggest things is we want to do 1 column at a time. So our first column will be on the left-hand side of the page, top left, and it's just going to be a name. It's who do we resent? And that's either a person, an institution, or a principle. And we want to go, it'll look something like mom, flip the page, dad, flip the page, the X, flip the page, the other X, flip the page, and then it gets a little more varied. I resent having to write a fourth step. I resent page nettering on it, the big book study, flip the page, right? And we want to get all our column 1s done. And the biggest thing with column 1 is we don't self-edit. We learned that, resentments are the #1 offender. They destroy more alcoholics than anything else. There is absolutely no harm in writing something down and finding out that it wasn't a big deal, but there may be harm in leaving things off. So just write it down. Pen to paper, flip the page, write it down. And then once we get all of our column 1s done, where we get into is column 2. And column 2 is, why am I angry? Why do I have this resentment? And for me, it's the 2 P's. We want to be point form and we want to be petty. So we want to write why I have this resentment, but we don't want to get too wrapped up into story. She forgot to pick me up from soccer practice. She wasn't the person I wanted her to be. He wasn't kind to me, that sort of thing. I don't want to get too into story, but I also want to be petty. I don't want to pretend that I'm more spiritual than I am. And I joke with my sponsees, this is where we get to use swear words. If you got some bad words that you want to use in your step work, this is it. You put in all those swear words you want to use, all good. Doesn't matter what word it starts or letter it starts with, you can write it in column 2, be petty and point form. And once we're done all of that, we get into column 3. And the benefit of going one column at a time is it helps us to just decompartmentalize it a little bit, help us not get overwhelmed with the emotion and with the story of it, and just put pen to paper, one column at a time. In column 3, what we're looking at is what was affected by the resentment. So if the resentment affects my self-esteem, I write down self-esteem. Self-esteem is how I feel about myself, right? Did it affect me thinking well of myself? Did I think, man, nobody likes me, I'm a loser, I'm a piece of garbage? Ambition, that is my desire to go out and do things in the future. So if it affected my ambition, I could look like a teacher that was mean to me. Maybe I didn't want to try in school, or if I had a really, really awful ex, maybe I didn't want to date again. That could affect my ambition. Then we break down security. So we have our physical security, emotional, and financial security. And if that resentment affects my physical security, what it often looks like is feeling physically unsafe. Did this resentment lead me to not feel physically safe? Similarly, emotional security. Did I feel emotionally unsafe? And finances, did it affect the pocketbook? Personal relations, and then we look at sex relations. And it's important to note, I do not have had to have any sort of sexual or romantic contact with somebody that affected my sex relations. Often our parent relationships affect our sex relations. So it's just, if it's true for us, it's true, we write it down. And what we're really trying to see is the depth of that resentment. All righty, so stop share. Let's get to the reading, which was the whole point of this. So again, bottom of 65, and we're right after the example. Now we're going to come back to the example, and we're going to see if we can do a 4th column for this example. But what we're writing, bottom of 65, we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So that's what we're after, especially in the first 3 columns. We want to be thorough and we want to be honest. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. Yes, I don't know about you, but when I finished my first 3 columns, I'm like, yes, the world and its people, they are wrong. Yes, because I could see it. I could see, yes, they suck. Here's why, and here's how it affected me, right? To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. And so that the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. That's a real callback to our 3rd step. And when we were talking about the actor playing the director and how I'm trying to rest with the W, satisfaction and happiness from life, if only I manage well. Welcome, we're on page 66. Awesome. And so I'm trying to manage well. And the more that I fight and I try to have my way, the worse it gets. And when it talks about in war, the victor only seemed to win. We know that with war, there's always casualties. And I sort of not like grew up, but like grew up in an AA where people would say, Paige, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I thought that was the stupidest question I had ever heard. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like the answer's right? It's like, I want to be right. And especially when I got here, I had not even approached happiness. Like happiness was something that was so elusive and so out of grasp for somebody like me. So it's like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Well, I didn't experience that. And I know I want to be right. Now, this is a little trick for when we get into our column 4. Being right, or that desire to be right, it's self-seeking. because I also don't just want to be right, because I already think I am right. I need to be right with an audience. I need to convince all of you. I need that unanimous decision of my correctness, right? There cannot be any dissenting votes. But then it was phrased another way to me. Paige, do you want to be right or do you want to be kind? Your wife says, she's right and happy. That was me. That was me. I'm right and I'm happy and I got it and it's fine, right? But do you want to be right or do you want to be kind? That opened it up for me. Do you want to be right or do you want to be God-centered? And when we get into fears, sometimes some of the things I hear about fears is you can't have faith and fear in the same house. And I don't know if that's true for me, because I almost need to have fear to have faith, because otherwise I'm just able to trust and there's no problem. But one of the things I know for certain to be true in my experience is there can't be self-centeredness and serenity in the same house, at least for me. So the more I try to get my own way, even if I get my near unanimous consensus that I am right, there's an emptiness and I got nowhere to go. And it says, it is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. And something I want to point out about this part of the paragraph is we're not talking about alcoholics here. It is plain that a life, any life, alcoholic or not, any life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? And that is any human being. And I'm sure we all know people who are not alcoholics, not addicts, don't have normal people who have deep, deep resentment and deep, deep anger. And what it's saying is holding on to that depth of anger, holding on to those resentments. It wastes my life. It robs me of joy. My life seems meaningless and I'm unhappy and I can't seem to win. And I waste these moments of this precious life, this only life that I have, and I waste them and they're gone being bitter and angry. And that's any human being. And there are people who can live with resentments, and it's sad and it's unfortunate, but we are not those people. It goes on to say, but with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. What that means is that it's fatal. And if you're like, girl, isn't it? It says, we found that it is fatal. And what I want to point out there in that sentence as well is that it's not just whose hope is a spiritual experience. And that is my hope when I get here. I know I need a spiritual experience, right? That has been laid out. I am going to drink again if I do not have that spiritual experience. But it says whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. Again, that is a reminder that this is not a set it and forget it deal, right? So often I talk about how I can't have crockpot sobriety. You know what I mean? I can't set it and forget it. Got to have that stir fry recovery where I'm in it every day and working at it. So I can't, just like I could not stay well on one drink, I cannot stay well on one spiritual experience. I've got to maintain it, but we don't like maintenance. You know what I mean? Anyone that drives is not excited for car maintenance, but also growth, the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. And that's exciting. I get to grow this thing. So to hold on to a resentment is fatal. Again, a really important reminder of why I write it down. Doesn't matter how small it is. That doesn't matter if I want to say, no, I'm just a little frustrated, or no, that was 30 years ago. Write it down. There's no harm in writing it down and seeing the patterns and getting free, but there might be harm in not putting it down. And it says, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the capital S spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again, and with us to drink is to die. And that paragraph, or those couple sentences explain, again, what am I doing in this fourth step? I'm trying to clear away the stuff that is within me that is blocking me from that power which is God. And that's what I'm there to do, just to clear away that stuff. But when I'm holding on to those resentments, I'm in that darkness and I need to be in that light. It says, if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. Now we know the word grouch, and grouch is, cranky or curmudgeonly. Curmudgeonly is an older word than grouch. That's not a helpful word to describe it. But grouch is that crankiness. But brainstorm. See, when we read brainstorm in our sort of modern vernacular, we think of something like, oh, we're just having a brainstorming session. We're coming up with ideas, brainstorming. Well, in the 1930s, that word brainstorm meant a sudden outburst of anger. So that's what it's talking about there. Although I do work with sponsees who are those chronic overthinkers that find themselves in analysis paralysis. And so that's also not for us either, right? We want to get to where our thought life is on a much higher plane. But again, the intention of what was written there was the grouch, that crankiness, that irritability, and that outburst of anger is not for us. Absolutely. A fit of rage. That doesn't work for us. It may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison, right? I'm sure we've all heard that expression, a resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And how true for an alcoholic, because if I hold on to that resentment, inevitably I will drink again. And I hope the other person suffers. But who's suffering? Me and my loved ones, right? So it says we turned back to the list, for it held the key to the future. And that's exciting. The key to the future is in this list. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. That's exciting. We're going to see this thing in a whole new way. And that's why I was really excited about this part of the book, because this is where our perspective really begins to change. And we begin to start that spiritual awakening, that process. So it says we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. We see that in the third column where these resentments are dominating me. It says in that state, the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. And when it talks about the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, what we find through this process, and I want you to know it was news to me, that 99% of my resentments were fancied because they felt real, right? 99% of the time, I think I was just this innocent victim minding my own business, and out of nowhere, I was harmed. But we will go and we will see where inevitably I made a decision based on self that put me in a position to be hurt. But there are cases where the wrongdoing that happened to me was real. And a lot of what we're talking about there is those things like childhood abuse. And we approach those sorts of resentments a little bit differently than how we're going to approach our 99% of resentments. So 99% of our resentments, we're going to say the prayer, and we're going to look where we made decisions based on self that put us in a position to be hurt. But with those ones, especially those ones that happen in childhood, that's not where we're looking. We're going to look at after. Because as a child, you had no responsibility. You did not make a decision that put yourself in a position to be hurt in any sort of way. You did not deserve it in any sort of way. But we do need to get free of it because it will kill. So we will say the prayers. That's a thing that we got to do. We don't have a way out of the prayers. We're going to have to say the prayers. But we look at after. And when we look at those things, we look at, did I use that as a reason to drink, to use, to destroy my life? Did I re-victimize myself with my behavior? Did I avoid treating it and seeking help for it? Did I hurt other people because that had happened to me? And we can look at that sort of stuff. And that's where we look there. That's always important at this part when we kind of talk about this heavy stuff. It is okay. It's more than okay to seek outside help for it. So if there's stuff, traumatic stuff, really painful stuff, of course, I do need to take inventory of it. Otherwise, I will drink again. I will relapse. I will end up in that hopeless position, right? And I will die. So of course I have to deal with that. But it's also okay to also get outside help. It's more than okay. And it'll actually talk about that much later. We'll talk about that in the family afterwards. And so most of them is my bad. I didn't realize it was my bad, but most of them, my bad. So it says, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. And that again tells me that this process is not about me climbing this ladder of success and overcoming my alcoholism, because I couldn't overcome my alcoholism. I had to surrender. I had to let go. I had to let God work through me. And I see that in step 1, I've got no power over alcohol. And then in step 3, any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. So me running my life isn't going to work anymore. And I let God into that. And then these resentments, I see that I cannot wish them away any more than alcohol. I need to let God into that too. And it's a giving more of myself to that unconditional love, which is God. And I just, and again, that's part of why, like, you know, and I'm sure I've done it too, where it's like that desire to self-edit and be like, no, it's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated, right? I can't overcome that frustration on my own, right? I need God's help. So it says this was our course. So this is the action that we take, and this is where it turns. It says we realized the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And we're going to come back to that. We're going to use that as a prompt to really open up in our 4th column. But that idea that they are just like me, that we're really opening up to this idea of humility. And it's that, and when I say humility, what I mean is that I'm no better than you, that I'm no worse than you, that I am equal to you. And for somebody like me, I'm dependent on God. This is where we're starting to see that. They, like ourselves, were sick too. They, like ourselves, were operating from a place of pain. And this is our resentment prayer. Because again, anytime in this book it says we ask, that is a prayer. So here it is. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And here's the thing, we kind of gloss over it a little sometimes. And I know I've said it like probably thousands of times in my life. But this is kind of a revolutionary prayer. And oftentimes we'll say, hey, we'll pray for them. But we're not really praying for them in this prayer. God, help me to show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. I'm praying to be able to show this person patience, tolerance, pity, that compassion, that understanding. And it's like, I know I can't do that on my own, especially when I'm convinced I'm right. You know what I mean? I need God's help. And then it says, this is a sick man. Again, the word sick has different connotations. Sometimes people in our modern language don't like the word sick. So this is a man who's coming from pain just like I am. And how can I be helpful to him? How can I be helpful to him? What a revolutionary idea. That idea of being helpful to those I'm pissed at, to those that I can't stand. How can I be helpful to them? And again, isn't that a callback to our 3rd step, to our employment contract that we signed, right? That I keep close to God and perform his work well. God's work for me is to be of love and service. And so what we're going to do is, before we write on our 4th column, we're going to say that prayer every single time, and at minimum, that prayer. And so what it would look like in our sort of this notebook of example, what I would say, because it's mom first, God, help me to show mom the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Mom is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And then I would start writing on my column 4. And then when my 4th column is done, I flip the page. Oh, it's Dad. God, help me to show Dad the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And then I write on my column 4. And when that's done, I flip the page. Oh, it's the X. All right. God, help me to show the X the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. The X is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me. God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And one of the things that I find really helpful in resentments is actually not to do it how I just did there, where it's mom, dad, the X, but actually to start at the back of the book and work forward. Because what I typically find is at the front of the book, the first few names, the first few resentments, those are the big, heavy duty resentments. Those are the ones where when our column 3, it's got a full house, right? And so we can see that those are the big, heavy ones. And almost invariably, at the end of our book is the little ones. Those are the ones where it's like, that guy who shares too long at the meeting, or, that jerk at work who won't stop clicking their pen. Those big ones, right? Although, to be fair, almost invariably near the end is one of those big heavies. Almost invariably one of those big heavies we didn't want to write down and we saved it to near the end. But by and large, going back to front is a really helpful way of working through the resentments. And here's why. One is those easy ones, guy clicking his pen or, sharing too long at the meeting, they help. They're not big. It's going to be real easy for me to see my mistakes, to see my wrongs, to see where I was at fault. I can do that 67 prayer and I can get some freedom from that process. But then I start seeing these patterns in that 4th column. I start seeing how I'm operating in all areas of my life. And so when I get to those big, heavy ones, those patterns, it's really easy to just roll them right in. Another thing, and this was kind of the point of this whole tangent, is there are some resentments that need a little bit more spiritual elbow grease, as it were. There are some resentments where I just need to bring even more prayer to them and more spiritual action to them. And so different things that I have done now, always 67, and that beautiful prayer, it really is incredible and wonderful. But some different things that I have done as well is I've done meditations, and I've done loving kindness meditations, and that's really helped to just soften the resentment. For those who, I do know that we have some people who come in from Hawaii and who listen in from Hawaii. So I am going to absolutely butcher the pronunciation of this. It's a Hawaiian prayer meditation called the Ho'oponopono. Got a lot of H and the O and the P and the O and the N and the O, a lot of those. There's an apostrophe in there too. And that also helps soften the resentment. Another beautiful action that we can take is to turn to page 552. And it's in a story, and this one is often called the resentment prayer, but just to be pedantic, I really want to point out the resentment prayer is on 67, and these are just some extra spiritual elbow grease and extra things that I just think it'd be helpful to show you. And so this is a story called Freedom from Bondage, and it's where we're at in the story. We're going to start with, he said, in effect, but it's a woman who has this deep and powerful resentment to her mom. And she knows that if she does not get free of it, she's going to drink again, but she doesn't know how. And she's delivering like magazines. And she sees one that it's got a prominent clergyman and it's got the word resentment. So she sees resentment and she's like, I got one of those. And this is what the article said. These were the directions. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or the thing that you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Here's how you know it's meant for people like us. Even when you don't really want it for them, and your prayers are only words, and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. And that's really, I think, the crux of my sponsorship, or like the thrust of my sponsorship, which is, that's okay, do it anyways. You're scared, do it anyways. You don't like it, do it anyways. You're mad at me, do it anyways. Do it anyways. Absolutely. And it says, do it every day for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And you'll find you've come to mean it and to want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. And she goes on to say, it worked for me then, and it has worked for me many times since. And it will work for me every time I am willing to work it. And that is every single spiritual action that we have. It works if I'm willing to take the action. Sometimes I have to ask first for the willingness, but it too always comes. And even though that this is in a story, that is a pattern that we're going to see throughout this book. If I am not willing to do something, it gives me the direction to pray for the willingness. Again, the book meets me where I'm at and takes me where I need to go. So if I'm not willing, I start with prayer for the willingness. And because it worked for me and it will work for all of us. As another great man says, the only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. And if you're wondering who that great man is, it's Chuck Chamberlain. And he wrote the book, A New Pair of Glasses. And that's what we're trying to get, a new lens, a new perspective. And so what these directions look like is that I'm going to pray for that person or that institution and even that principal every day for 2 weeks. And what that looks like is God, I pray that you would help their health, offer them health, their prosperity, their happiness. And then I look, what do I want for myself? Genuinely, what do I want for myself? And then I pray that for them. I pray that they will feel loved. I pray that they will have a joyful, contented, sober life. I pray they will find peace. I don't want a Lamborghini, but let's say I did. I'll pray for them to have a Lamborghini. That's what I'm doing every day for 2 weeks. And those are the directions. And again, I'm just offering this as a little bit of that sort of spiritual, like elbow grease, especially for those big, tricky ones. There's other prayers that are beautiful, and I talk about them being pocket prayers. Pocket prayers are ones that are easy to remember and pull out in a step 10 type moment. One of those is bless them, change me. So if I'm being irritated and I'm being irked, bless them, change me. And sometimes we're like, excuse me, I do not want them to be blessed. Why am I the one that needs changing? Well, if I got the resentment, I'm always the one that needs changing. And even if I'm not too keen about them being blessed, if they're blessed, they're probably less likely to irritate me. So there's some thought in that. Another one is, God, help me to see them through your eyes. Another prayer that I utilize quite a bit. And again, these are just additional spiritual elbow grease prayers. It came from an Al-Anon. And a man, her name is Mary Pearl. And if you're ever, or Mary P, and if you're ever listening to an Al-Anon talk, man, she is the most intense. This is the most intense story I've ever heard. I mean, and I deal with like alcoholics and drug addicts, and I'm like, whoa, you did what? And she had a resentment to her mom. And the prayer that she used and that I got from her and I added to my prayer book is, God, help me to see that this person as you see them. Help me to accept and love them as you accept and love them. Help me to give them the grace that you give them and the grace that you've given me. And so these are just some prayers that we can utilize, some extra stuff. But again, at minimum, what we're going to do is say that 67 prayer. And that 67 prayer is powerful on its own. I just kind of wanted to offer those things and some of my experiences with them. So going back to page 67, we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. Again, we wouldn't treat people who are hurting, who are in pain, who are broken. We wouldn't treat them that way. We wouldn't treat somebody who has cancer the way that we are treating these people that we're resentful towards, right? That's the metaphor. It says, if we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. Again, the call back to that third step, right? I am here to be helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly, tolerant view of each and every one. Again, I cannot master resentments on my own. I need God's help with this too. And God will help me change that lens. God will give me that freedom. So it says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. So we're no longer thinking about them, we're thinking about us. We resolutely looked for our own mistakes. And so one of the things is it can be oftentimes we'll call, and I do this too, like I'm not going to shame anyone who does that. Oftentimes will end up calling the fourth column my part. But what we're really looking at is our wrongs, our faults, our mistakes. And sometimes it can be important to not call it our part because it can imply that they have a part. And so we're trying to disregard that entirely. But again, I don't care what we call things. I care if we do things, right? So you call it whatever you want. But one of the really helpful places to go is, again, back at the top of 67. So it says, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So this is something that can be really, really helpful with those big, stubborn resentments. Or if you're working with a sponsee or a newcomer who's really resistant and who's really defended and who's really guarded, right? And oftentimes, if they're just not open, we send them to more prayer. That'll loosen it up. But this is a really good prompt. And it is, have I done those things? So if I go to that second column and I see they stole from me and they were dishonest and they were a jerk, have I stolen from others? Have I been dishonest? Have I been a jerk? And I look and I ask myself, have I done those things? And oftentimes I'll see that I've done those things to them, you know? And it's also a really good prompt that can help with some of the more nebulous ones. So like, for example, this is for the Canadians, if I'm resentful at Tim Hortons, but to bring it back to the Americans, if I'm resentful at Dunkin' Donuts, maybe because they make my coffee inconsistently, right? Or they take too long. Have I been inconsistent? Have I had poor time management? Have I overwhelmed myself and let people down? It's just a really good prompt that opens things up. Now, another really good prompt comes on page 62. And so what we're looking at is that first full paragraph on page 62. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by hundreds of forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So I can use this as a prompt as well. Where did I make a decision based on self, which later put me in a position to have this resentment, right? So I'm looking beforehand. Again, this is with the 99% of our resentments, not looking at things like childhood abuse. Where did I make that decision? A selfish, self-centered, self-seeking decision that put myself in a position to even have that resentment in the first place. And we're going to go back to that example that we have, and we're going to find that fourth column, and we're going to really do that through the lens of that prompt. But the other prompts are, where had we been selfish, dishonest? So, sorry, going back to page 67. Sorry, sometimes I just assume y'all have read my mind. Back to 67. I will communicate verbally, not telekinetically. Back to 67. So resolutely looking for our own mistakes. So where had we been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And what I want to point out is it's not had we been. Where had we been? Not I was selfish, I was dishonest, maybe now I wasn't self-seeking, I was afraid, but where had I been? And so that allows us to expand on it. Where was I selfish? Where was I showing up and playing God? Where was I controlling? Where was I trying to micromanage? Where did I think I knew best? Where was I dishonest? Or was I stealing, lying, manipulating? but also a lot of, I'm just going to share my inventory with you guys. A lot of my dishonesty looks like not communicating like boundaries and saying, hey, actually, or communicating at all. Hey, actually, I don't like it when you punch me in the face. I mean, that's kind of, it's not that, well, it can get that dramatic, but like, hey, actually, I don't like this, or hey, I would prefer if we did it this way. So much of my resentments are not communicating. And that has been an area of dishonesty for me. Self-seeking. And a lot of that self-seeking looks like where I'm trying to get from other people to make me okay. Self-seeking validation, attention, affection, approval, pity. I've done that in the past, again, that needing to be right, self-seeking, right? I need to be right, and I need y'all to agree with me. Also, people-pleasing. It's not people-pleasing, it's approval seeking. I call it a different word, but I'm watching my language. It's approval seeking. I need your approval because I don't care if you're happy. I don't care if you're pleased. I care if you like me. And so what I've done is I've created a contract, and there's some strings attached. You know what I'm saying? I'll do this for you, but I'm keeping score. And I need you to do this thing for me. And the thing I usually need you to do for me is, yes, it is exactly that one, Summer. Yes, Summer gets the word, and she guessed it correctly. And so, so looking at, that self-seeking, I need to be right, I need to be liked, I need those things, and I need you in many ways to be God in my life. What that looks like is I need you to fix me. I need you to be okay. I need you to make me okay and do those things for me, which I could not do for myself. And you'll notice that that's a little codependent. And that codependency is me putting people and outside situations in the position of God. Anyway, that's just some of my inventory. You guys don't need to share yours. Don't you worry about it. And so it says, and so that's where I can and the fears, man, writing on those fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear that if you really knew me, you'd hate me, fear that I am, that the depth of who I am is unworthy. Other common defects are I'm judging because I'm coming from this place of less than ego, and I'm going to judge you and gossip and criticize. So I get this boost of better than ego and I feel worse, right? I'm trying to control because I have this fear of not having control. These are just some examples of some fourth column stuff just from my own, lots of inventory, and frequently wrong. So it says, though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. Now, again, I know I can be a little pedantic. That is one of those defects that I have. And I was talking about the difference between my part or my faults and my mistakes. But I'm not so pedantic that you have to use a black pen. It can be a blue pen if you are a blue pen person. I am a black pen person. You don't need that information, but I like the black pens. But if you like the blue pens, don't you worry. You can do inventory in blue pen and still have a spiritual experience. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. And in so doing, what opens up for us is we see the starting of our 8-step list. We start to see where we caused harm, and heck, where we caused harm first. And in so doing, we grow in that willingness to set it right and to make it right. So let's go back to page 65. And let's see, and I'll do it, but let's see if we can figure out what this fourth column would be. So first and foremost, it's Mr. Brown. Now, normally how I would suggest that we work this is we go bottom to top. So we go my wife, my employer, Miss Jones, Mr. Brown. But for our purposes today, let's go top to bottom. So we're resentful of Mr. Brown, and just a quick review, because of his attention to my wife. He told my wife of my mistress, and Brown may get my job at the office. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start with the prayer. God, and the prayer I'm going to use is at minimum the page 67 prayer, the resentment prayer. God, help me to show Mr. Brown the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Mr. Brown is a sick person. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. All righty. Can I see where I might have made a decision based on self, which later put me in a position to be hurt? Well, just kind of off the bat, if I don't have a mistress, Mr. Brown has nothing to tell my wife. Now, I'm just going to throw out there that just by chance, having a mistress might be a little selfish, a little dishonest. You know what I mean? Maybe. If you're married, yes. You don't need to run that by your spouse. But that's selfish. That's dishonest. And also, here's the thing. I don't know about you guys. I'm an alcoholic. I don't have one mistress. I have two. And you might be like, what are you talking about? I have that mistress that is alcohol. And so I am spending all my time with my mistress, but I'm also spending my time with that mistress that is alcohol. And so I'm not giving attention to my wife. I'm not giving her time and care and that sort of thing. And then it goes on to say, Brown may get my job at the office. Well, we're going to see what type of employee I have been. Less than stellar. A less than stellar employee. That's what I've been. And so I'm not showing up. I'm not doing a good job. We're going to see where I've really not been doing a good job. And so if though none of that was happening, I wouldn't have that resentment to Mr. Brown. So that's where I made the decision based on self that put me in a position to be hurt. The next one we see is Miss Jones. She's a nut. She's a nut. She snubbed me. Oh, she committed her husband for drinking, and he's my friend. She's a gossip. And you'll notice we write more about Miss Jones than anyone else, and it's pretty point form, right? Pretty punchy. So again, it tells us we don't want to get too much into story with our second column. But I gotta get free. I gotta get clear. All right, Miss Jones. God, help me to show Miss Jones the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Miss Jones is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. So when I'm looking for where I may have made decisions based on self that later put me in a position to be hurt, I might be bothered that she's a gossip because I'm doing some things that I do not want gossiped about. If you're wondering, a mistress, right? So if I don't have that mistress, I might not be afraid that she's going to gossip. Also, her husband, who's my friend. So I'm drinking with her husband, and his drinking got so bad that he had to be committed. It indicates he's probably an alcoholic. And so I'm drinking with her husband. And if his alcoholism is anything like mine, that family is getting destroyed. Those hearts are getting broken. The financial security of that home is getting ruined. I'm taking him out on escapades. And also, again, if she knows about the mistress, she might not be too jazzed that her husband's hanging out with me. You know what I mean? Right? But I'm causing harm to her and her family. And I have no consideration for my drinking buddy. He's my friend. Now I can't drink with him. His life is in danger. And I don't care. And I can't see that. And I'm not thinking about that. And I'm showing up with that selfishness and inconsideration for him and their well-being. Also, she's a nut and she snubbed me. So this is some bad news. And I'm so sorry to ruin your day. But sensitive, because I would go around and say that I was sensitive. Sensitive is just a synonym for self-centered. Is it possible that he's being a little self-centered? She snubbed me. I am ruining his family. You know what I mean? Dad's not home with the kids. Wife doesn't know where he is. I am causing so much stress and pain. And she's probably not too jazzed that I got a mistress. And I can't even consider that. I'm thinking, what about me? And whenever I think, even today, what about me? That is the calling card of my self-centeredness. And I know I'm in trouble. All right, my employer. unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for padding my expense account. Now, when I got here, I didn't really know what an expense account was because I wasn't functional or trusted enough to have one of those. But if you're wondering what padding your expense account is, that is stealing. That is stealing. So I'm going to say a prayer for my employer, and it's going to be the 67. God, help me to show my employer the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. So I'm stealing from work. So that's a little selfish, a little dishonest. You know what I mean? Also, just a scotch. I'm throwing it out there. I don't know what sort of employees you guys were, but I'm not showing up. I mean, I can just end that sentence there. I'm not showing up. Like, there were times I would be gone from work for like weeks or more at a time. When I am showing up, I'm not always showing up sober and alert and ready to work. I'm also, even those times I am showing up sober, I'm not showing up with that positive mental attitude now, am I? I'm miserable and resentful and probably a little hungover still, right? And I hate it, and I'm just there focused on what I can get, and oh, how you treat me, and I'm focused on me and my self-centeredness. And then my wife. So if we're wondering, misunderstands and nags, likes Brown, jerk, wants house put in her name. All right, so what am I going to do? I'm going to say the prayer. God, help me to show my wife the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. My wife is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. So, I mean, again, a theme, a pattern that we can just roll right into this is, I got that mistress. Not one, but two. I got that mistress that is the mistress, and I got that mistress that is alcohol, and I'm not giving her time. I'm not giving her attention. I'm not fulfilling my commitment to the marriage, right? And in that way, I'm being dishonest. And then it says wants house put in her name. So keep in mind the context of what's going on. We are in the 1930s, and it would be a lot more difficult for her to find a job to support the family. And she probably wants the house put in her name because I'm drinking away the money and I'm about to lose my job. Also, I'm cheating on her and she's got no security. And when I can see that, that changes how I show up to things. And so one of the things too is what we're going to do is we're going to see the fears that are driving me. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those fears in that fourth column, and then we're going to take them to our next section, which will be fears, and we'll cover that next week. And I think that wrapped up, I almost never do it that like succinctly as I'm going on about how I wrapped it up well and unsuccinctly. So we'll wrap it up there. Come back next week. We'll do fears.